Golden Iris Productions presents Missionary Family Adventures, Beneath the Volcano, Part 1, from the book by Mark F. Dennis.
Introduction. This is the story of an American missionary family and their remarkable journey to Japan. It is a story of faith, family, adventure, and growing up between two cultures. It is the story of how an ordinary family from America found themselves living beneath one of the most active volcanoes in the world. The events you are about to hear are not fiction. They are real memories from a childhood spent in the mountains of Japan. They are stories of ocean voyages, mountain trails, train rides, cultural discoveries, and the experiences that shaped an entire family. To understand how we came to live in such an extraordinary place, we begin not in America, but beneath the shadow of a volcano in the Japanese Alps.
Historical disclaimer. This series faithfully presents the writings and memories of missionary Dick Dennis. His observations about religion, culture, and society reflect his sincerely held evangelical Christian beliefs during the 1960s. They are presented in their historical context to preserve the authenticity of his family's story and are not intended as commentary on the beliefs of others today. Danny's 5th birthday. It was February 1st, 1973. Fresh snow covered the countryside, and a cold alpine breeze drifted through the forests surrounding our home. The world outside looked peaceful and untouched. Winter had wrapped the mountains in a blanket of white. Dinner had just ended, and our family was preparing to celebrate Danny's birthday. We were about to sing Happy Birthday when something unusual happened. A strange hush settled over everything. Not a bird chirped. Not a sound could be heard. The silence was almost unnatural, as though the entire countryside had suddenly stopped breathing. For a brief moment, the world seemed perfectly still. Then, everything changed. Without warning, the house was struck by a violent earthquake. This was not the kind of earthquake that begins with a gentle trembling and gradually grows stronger. It hit instantly with tremendous force. The entire house shook violently. Pictures rattled. Furniture trembled. Everyone froze in surprise. For a moment, we wondered if we should run outside. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the shaking stopped. The silence returned. Everything became still once again. No one knew what had just happened. Then, less than a minute later, came something even more frightening. A tremendous blast rolled across the valley. It was more than a sound. It was a pressure wave that struck the chest and seemed to take the breath right out of your lungs. At that moment, we knew exactly what had happened.
The eruption. We rushed to the windows. Above the mountain, a massive column of black smoke was rising into the sky. The cloud towered thousands of feet above the summit, boiling upward with incredible force. Lightning flashed through the darkness of the ash cloud. The mountain had erupted. Although none of us had ever experienced a volcanic eruption before, there was no doubt about what we were seeing. Within minutes, small rocks began falling from the sky. Some were the size of peas, others were the size of marbles. They bounced across rooftops and rattled against vehicles like hailstones. Soon sheets of volcanic sand and ash followed. The beautiful white snow that had covered the countryside only moments earlier began turning gray. The air filled with the sharp smell of sulfur. Breathing outside became difficult. The once peaceful winter landscape had been transformed into a scene of raw natural power.
Our Mount Sinai. It was beneath this volcano that our family lived and where much of our childhood was spent. The mountain was Mount Asama, one of Japan's most active volcanoes. Although it stood only about 6 miles away as the crow flies, a small mountain range separated us from the volcano and provided a measure of protection from its most dangerous eruptions. Despite the danger, it was one of the most beautiful places in the world. We lived high in the Japanese Alps, surrounded by forests, streams, meadows, and mountain ridges. During the day, a column of smoke often rose from the crater and drifted into the sky. At night, the glow of molten lava reflected against the smoke, creating the appearance of a pillar of fire. To us as children, it looked very much like the biblical Mount Sinai. When the volcano erupted, the earth shook beneath our feet. Lightning flashed through the skies. The mountain roared with power. Over the years, we would witness several more eruptions. The smell of sulfur would sometimes drift through the valleys. Volcanic ash would coat the roads, fields, and winter snow. Yet this mountain became part of our lives. It watched over our childhood adventures. It stood above our home through every season. And it was beneath the shadow of Mount Asama that the story of our missionary family unfolded. But how did an American family come to live beneath a volcano in the mountains of Japan? To answer that question, we must travel back nearly 20 years to a snowstorm in New Jersey, where a young man named Dick met a young woman named Millie.
Part 2. How did we get here? How did an American missionary family come to live beneath an active volcano in the mountains of Japan? To answer that question, we must travel back nearly 20 years. Long before there was a home in Japan, before there were children exploring mountain trails and streams, before there was a mission field, there was a young man named Dick and a young woman named Millie growing up in northwestern New Jersey. Their story began during a snowstorm. Neither of them could have imagined where that meeting would eventually lead. What started as a high school romance would become a journey that crossed oceans, cultures, and continents. And it all began in Sussex County, New Jersey. Meeting Dick. Dick and Millie first met in 1954 during a snowstorm while attending a high school farm show in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Millie remembered noticing Dick first. He was wearing the royal blue corduroy jacket of the Future Farmers of America. Dick remembered the story differently. He insisted that he noticed her first. Both grew up in northwestern New Jersey near the New York state line and attended Sussex High School. Millie was a freshman and Dick was an upperclassman. Like many freshman girls, she paid more attention to the older boys than to the boys in her own class. A few months after that trip, they began spending more time together. Conversations became friendships, and friendships slowly began turning into something more. Neither one realized it at the time, but God was already beginning to weave their lives together. Off to college. After graduating from high school, Dick left New Jersey and headed to Elizabethtown College in Pennsylvania. During his college years, he became involved in youth leadership within his church and even received a local preacher's license. Yet something was missing. Dick and Millie occasionally attended each other's churches, and both sensed a difference they could not quite explain. Dick had been taught that the Bible contained the Word of God, but he had never seriously studied it for himself. Deep within his heart, there was a growing desire to know God more deeply. He wanted answers. He wanted purpose. He wanted to understand what God wanted him to do with his life. At the time, he believed his future would be in forestry. God, however, had other plans. The Forest Service. During his summer breaks from college, Dick worked for the United States Forest Service. His assignments took him west to Colorado and Idaho. He loved the outdoors. He loved the forests. He loved photography and carried his camera wherever he went. The work was rugged and demanding. The crews lived in tents. Meals were cooked over open fires. Metal trash cans placed in cold mountain streams served as refrigerators. The men spent their days cruising timber and surveying forests across some of the most beautiful landscapes in America. For Dick, it was a wonderful adventure. Yet amid the mountains and forests, another journey was quietly beginning, a spiritual journey that would change the direction of his entire life.
The message of the Bible. While working in one of these remote logging communities, Dick attended a series of evangelistic meetings held for loggers and forestry workers. The message touched him deeply. Years earlier, when he was only 14 years old, he had attended meetings conducted by Jack Wyrtzen and had responded to an invitation to accept Christ as his Savior. The experience had made an impression on him, but there had been little opportunity afterward to grow in his faith. Now, once again, he found himself confronted with the message of the Bible. This time, the impact was profound. Dick began to sense that God was calling him into ministry. The future he had carefully planned for himself suddenly seemed less certain. Forestry no longer appeared to be his ultimate destination. God was calling him towards something greater, something eternal. When he returned to college, he changed his major and began preparing for ministry. The path ahead was still unclear, but the direction had been set. Getting married. On June 1st, 1958, Dick and Millie were married. They were young, they were deeply in love, and they were just beginning their life together. Shortly after the wedding, they headed west to Idaho, where Dick had accepted another Forest Service assignment. Their honeymoon would be unlike anything most newlyweds could imagine. There would be no luxury hotels, no tropical beaches, no crowded tourist attractions. Instead, their honeymoon would take place on a remote mountain overlooking the forests of Idaho. It would become one of the most memorable experiences of their lives.
Honeymoon on Elk Summit. Dick had been assigned to a fire lookout tower on Elk Summit. The nearest town was 12 miles away. The surrounding wilderness was home to moose, elk, bears, skunks, and little else. Dick spent his days at the top of a 110-foot lookout tower watching for signs of forest fires. Below stood a small one-room cabin. There was no electricity. Water had to be carried from a nearby creek. One of Dick's first responsibilities was digging a new hole for the outhouse. Life was simple. Life was isolated. Yet for Dick and Millie, the mountain provided something invaluable. Time. Time to learn about each other. Time to think. Time to pray. And time for God to continue shaping the course of their future. Therefore stand. After the wedding, Millie's pastor gave Dick a book titled Therefore Stand by Wilbur Smith. While spending long hours in the lookout tower, Dick immersed himself in its pages. Never before had he encountered such a clear presentation of the message of Jesus Christ. The book strengthened his faith and deepened his conviction. By the end of that summer, he came down from Elk Summit a changed man. He was more certain than ever that God was calling him into ministry. The forests of Idaho had given him much more than a summer job. They had provided the setting for a spiritual transformation. Soon, Dick and Millie would return to Pennsylvania. A teaching career would begin. Children would arrive. And God would continue preparing them for an even greater adventure. An adventure that would eventually carry them across the Pacific Ocean. To Japan.
To be continued. This presentation draws upon material from The Smell of Leaves Burning, Missionary Wife, by Millie Smucker, my mother. Her memoir provides a first-hand account of the challenges, sacrifices, and adventures of missionary life in Japan during the 1960s and 1970s. Many of the events and family experiences presented in this series are preserved through her memories and writings. If you would like to learn more about her remarkable journey, please scan the QR code or visit the book on Amazon. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this presentation, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share this video with others. For more content, visit my 2 YouTube channels. Mark F. Dennis at Golden Iris Knowledge Quest, where we explore physics, cosmology, science, and emerging ideas about the structure of the universe. and Mark F. Dennis at Golden Iris Religion Quest, where we examine religion, spirituality, biblical studies, Jewish mysticism, and the history of religious thought. Your support helps these channels continue to grow and allows me to create more presentations, books, and educational content. Thank you again for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.